Alright guys, that's Kremp again. I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day so far. Big day for the Major 3 qualifiers, and with roster changes coming into this weekend, certainly out of the Carolina Royal Ravens, serious questions emerging this evening as to whether another team needs to join them on this move ASAP. Cloud9 versus Boston certainly turned some heads. Some other important series of the day as well, certainly the first one, which was somewhat difficult to call. The final series, however, bit of a foregone conclusion. Lots of talking points on what these teams may need to do, because champs for some of these teams is already slipping out of their grasp. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new. As always, we're going to dive straight in. This was a very interesting series on paper, right? Because Miami were undefeated so far. Well, technically, Toronto were undefeated too. Okay, they lost to Boston, right? But look, I'm not going to say they're undefeated because they were down 2-0 in that series, and maybe it was fair enough. But of course, the way they lost that series, they literally forfeited the series because they say they were lagging. So, whatever. Given their performances since then, we're probably going to give a bit of credence to that from Toronto because, you know, they've had such a hard run of qualifiers, theoretically, right? I mean, they've literally played. They lost to Boston. They've beaten Thieves, they've beaten FaZe, and they've now beaten Miami, a team that beat FaZe and OpTic. So clearly, this Toronto team is looking nice. It shouldn't be a massive surprise, especially, you know, online. I believe in this team to no ends. On LAN, I also kind of do, but I'm still a little bit concerned about Toronto when push comes to shove, whether they'll be able to get it over the line, let's say. But this, just quickly, actually, as the series gets underway from Linz, we're going to talk about Gentlemates in a few minutes time and how chalked they still are, but he was obviously on that Gentlemates team and still is on their bench, but he was on the Omit team that came second. We talked about it this morning, and now he's been dropped. So pretty wild, kind of surprised maybe, but also it's kind of a tough moment, right? Because you look at that Gentlemates team, you look at what they're going through. Linz, it's not like he was bad for that team down there in challenges, but you know, he would have been hoping for a more dominant stint maybe, and I'm sure that he's going to join another decent team, but something to keep an eye on. This series though went down to the wire, to be honest. The first couple of maps were super competitive. The issue again remains for Miami is that they do have a very inconsistent set of players. Now, I think that Rencor and Real and Super, look, it's Spanish COD, as Trey would say. There's always going to be, with the pace that they play at, some level of inconsistency. But the player that people have always kept their eyes on here is Metals. I mean, I said it when they beat FaZe. If Metals has a 1.2, they're probably beating everyone in the league, with very few exceptions. Because if he's playing at that level, or even like, let's say a 1.3, because he drops those sometimes as well, and the rest of the team are holding their own, they're so tough to beat. The issue is that Metals is, I mean, he is the most, I mean, I've said this before, but he is no doubt the most inconsistent player in the league. And maybe that's okay, right? Because if I'm Miami, would I prefer to have a solid team that's going to come top 6 every event, because you have talents, but maybe it's not enough to get much further. Maybe you max out by making a Sunday. You know, maybe your ceiling is top 8 or so, or your floor is top 8 or something. Or would I prefer a team that has the talents that when they really put it together, they could win the whole thing potentially, but they also have the floor of a top 12. Like, what would I prefer? If I'm a general manager trying to keep my job, maybe I want the more consistent team. But if I'm a competitor, I want a team with the potential to win. So that's what this team has. I mean, look, they came top 3 at the first event, different team, sure, but now it's not that dissimilar of a story. And with Metals, you do have the upside, where like when he goes off, they can beat the top teams, but it's not going to happen all the time. And it is just what it is. Now, game 1 was very competitive anyway. Toronto eventually take the win. It was really close. I mean, it was 259 or 249 to 240. Eventually again 250, 240. But it came down to the P1. Eventually the Toronto boys did enough. JoeDeceives had a big takeover moment towards the end, as did CleanX really during the game. The SMG duo putting in work as you might expect, but Metals tough map 1, 21 in 37 to go down. The game 2, Ultra eventually lost this one in around 11, so it was all tied up. Heretics got the win on the dealership, and then after that there was a bit of discussion during the control that they played, but eventually Toronto closed this out as they did the final map of the series 2. This was a great map here again from CleanX, and certainly Insight. Metals was in the double negative, so you know, as I say, it just is what it is sometimes, and he didn't have the greatest map for either, where they eventually go down on the protocol. So Toronto take a victory. It wasn't commanding precisely. Heretics Heretics are still looking good as far as I'm concerned, but JoeDeceives was on pointer to close out the series in the end. Going into the major, look, who do I expect of these two teams to place higher? I'm still saying Toronto. I think they're still the stronger team. They've maybe proven that here again today. Look, Miami, do they have the opportunity? Do they have the potential to do something crazy? Yeah, and at the end of the day, if they manage to make a run to top 3 or something, and I wouldn't bet on it, right? But if they were to do that, they would score so many CDL points, so that's also the upside. Look, if you place top 6 every event, you do score some good points, but if you were to make a finals or come top 3 as they did at the first major, that top 3 back in Madrid, that might make them champs at the end of the day. So that's pretty much where they sit themselves, but Toronto have cemented themselves as a very credible threat in the winners bracket this tournament. And as Ben Bean says, GG's Miami, currently 3-1, gentlemates to finish off. So it wasn't for the Boston series, they could have been 5-0. Maybe you don't want to be 5-0 with the curse we have seen there before. These were the numbers. Then look, Real 1.1, Rancor 1.1, Super 1 flat, Metals 64 to 100, right? And look, you live and you die by it. It is what it is. But it's a question, right? Because if you're Miami, maybe look, I don't think that getting rid of Metals is, as I say, necessarily the right solution. I think that maybe you actually want a player like that on the team. People are calling him the Spanish Pristini. If you guys have been around a few years, you'll know Pristini was, when he was in the league, the most inconsistent player in the league. But when he fried, they won every time. So that's kind of the Heretics model. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. It is what it is. But a good result there, I thought, from Toronto. This, though, was the critical series in terms of potential changes, because Toronto and Heretics, I think they will, stick out their rosters until the end of the season. And Boston, I think, will too. Maybe part of that is a money thing, to be fair. But I've liked this Boston team. You guys know my thoughts on the Boston team. I'm a big fan of the way they go about their business and the approach that they've had to this season. This was a series I was, expecting them to win. I wasn't sure that I was expecting it, though, to be quite so emphatic, right? They play Cloud9. And this was not even close. The game one, it was an absolute Purge JoeDeceives masterclass. And yeah, what an individual performance. Snoopy played well too. But Purge, again, he does this, right? Purge, even when Purge has like a 0.8, he's still, I think, making some decent plays and contributing to the team. They can still win when Purge isn't having a great series. But when he does have a good series, then they do become a serious threat. And this is the Cloud9 team that, look, they're sitting at, 100 points roughly, something like that in the league right now. The championship cutoff might end up being something like 175, 180. We're not really sure, but it's probably going to be in that kind of a ballpark. So there's a long way for Cloud9 to go if they want to make it to champs. And we know that this team have gone through some internal difficulties. Attach was, we're pretty sure, sitting out for at least one scrim set they played with Capsidol. They decided not to go forward with it, but there's been plenty of other talk as well. Even when Vivid has become onto the market with the whole Ravens situation, people have said, could Vivid be an option for this team? I think in an ideal world, you probably would get a player like a Kismet, but I don't think that's doable, nor maybe do Kiz and Sib want to play with each other again. Probably not after the drama of last year that we, that we believe happened internally at that team regardless. So not sure what C9 can do. Look, the Capsidol option was there, move the roles around a bit. And I wonder what's going to happen about this, because Ravens, you guys remember what happened last weekends? They had done the same thing. They had Vivid out for a series of scrims they played, or a set of scrims. They played with Kenny in. They couldn't get the Kenny move done due to Ravens being still the Ravens as an organization. And then they got reverse swept by Surge and dropped Vivid within 24 hours. And eventually, of course, now have picked up Dylan Rex. Is a similar thing on the horizon for C9? Because this is a series that losing it is devastating, really. This is a big series for champs. Boston are one of your big contenders to make champs, and they soak up, frankly, an easy 10 points. And this was, probably the worst. Awakening's here in a 1 versus 3. Sure, the first kill he traded out onto Sib, so kind of a 1 versus 2. But he doesn't really know where the guys are. He's got to defuse the bomb. He channels onto Kremp, gets this kill. Attach isn't in position to trade, and Attach makes a reasonable play, I think, to, try and find the trade. But then, the way that he plays this 1v1, he just frankly gets caught out by Awakening, and Awakening clutches a very, very nice 1v3. I think this is where some of the questions have come from, right? Because Attach has, he's been the player maybe that's been on the most questions, although I think Mack you could throw into the conversation as a recent as well. Kremp's probably been their best player, certainly the best SMG. Sib has probably been their best player on average this season so far, but they've just not scored many points compared to the talent they've had, and Attach understandably has found himself under some degree of pressure. Last weekend, on Hacienda Search, he clutched him a big 1v1 to eventually win them the series. This time, this was a 1v1 that you're going to want back, right? Especially with how close the map eventually became. Boston take it in the end in a 6-4 fashion. And then, after the 6-4 dub, they went on to frankly dominate the control. This wasn't close. Per J Masterclass, 26-14 for the win. So, rough series for the Cloud9 guys. And this is the big question, right? Are they compromised as a team? Of course, you've got accuracy in the back of the picture here as well. The question, I guess, for you guys is, because I don't think many would disagree that this team probably needs to do something. The question maybe is it a one-man? Is it a two-man, right? Like, these are the discussions going around, because right now, with the way the championship standings lie, it's not pretty for C9 if they just keep running it down. Attach says, got slammed, nothing else to it. GG's, Boston lost A3, and the numbers did not look pretty for pretty much anyone, right? But look, it's not like you're looking at the numbers here to single out two to drop. It's more like when you're getting 3-0 slammed like this bad, and Boston are good. Like, I think Boston deserve probably more credit than they get, in my opinion. But, at the end of the day, it's not really about that. It's more that you're getting slammed by a team that's equally in that kind of dogfight to make champs. That's a bad sign. And standings now looking like this, right? They got that win against Minnesota, which was huge for them, but they're still sitting at 105. Boston now at 140. Miami at 130. OpTic at 130. So, again, Miami losing to Toronto, that prevents them getting further away. But that battle for champs is, it's looking precarious for all of these teams, of course. And one team that is out of the picture, let's be real, is the Gentlemates. I think, unfortunately for them, it doesn't seem no matter what they do, they're just going to get slammed. Thieves are real good, so maybe you can't read into it too much, right? But the run that they have to the end of the season in terms of qualifiers is just really strong. And Gorillas have, they've got a real tough time on their hands. It's tough for Gentlemates because there might be a world where they could have had a different roster to this. Of course, they had Lins. Should they have got rid of him? It was justifiable. I don't think that bringing in Johnny was a bad idea. I think that he's proved to be a good option for them. But here they are with a team. I mean, last year, Gentlemates turned up to the World Cup and they had Cobra on the team, didn't they, at the time? Like, there was a possibility maybe to get some other European players out there. Maybe they could have done, but visas can be a problem with players from Europe. Maybe Gataga would want to field. I'm sure he'd want to field a different team. Does Gataga really want a team with FeLo and Lunarz on? Probably not, let's be real. But given the circumstances, it may have been the best option they could have gone for. But it's not like this was a competitive series. There's not that much to say, really. There's a bit of reset cheese happening in the search and destroy. Thieves eventually get the dub there, and then they dominate the control. Nobody is shocked. So it was a quick GG. Funny in a way, because this series, it used to be one to look forward to, right? You guys remember when Thieves versus Los Angeles Gorillas was an absolute bagger series that typically Gorillas would win. They always had the upper hand of that rivalry. It used to be a rivalry, and now it's not a rivalry. Well, it used to not be a rivalry because Gorillas would always win. Now it's not a rivalry because Gorillas are terrible. So, how times have changed, really. Look, Johnny ends with a 0.8. The entire team got slammed. Envoy with a 1.3. HyDra with a 1.2. Scrap with a 1.2. I mean, this is like almost the perfect score. What if you're Thieves? I know that it's a team they should be beating, but like when Scrap and HyDra both have 1.2s, Ghosty's at a 0.9 and just, he's kicking his feet up, having a good time. And Envoy, it doesn't really matter what Envoy does in this scenario as long as he's holding his own. But especially if Envoy takes over, I mean, there's just no way you're going to lose, but you're not going to lose to this team right now anyway. So that's where we're going to leave it for the day. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below, because of course people will argue, look, Gentlemates should change as well. They've got to do something, and sure, that would be justified as well. But, what else are they going to really change at this point? Is it going to affect the outcome of the season? Let's be real, probably not. For Cloud9, it's still all to play for, and right now they're not playing very well. So hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.